Commissioner, Minister, participants of the seminar, and ladies and gentlemen, most welcome to our seminar, Better Regulation for a More Competitive Europe. I'm very glad that you are all here today to discuss and highlight how better regulation can further strengthen the internal market and the competitiveness in EU and businesses. Further, of course, also how Sweden and other member states can contribute and take a leading role to make this work successful. As you all know, globalization, you have heard that word before, I presume, and digitization means that the national institutions and regulatory frameworks are subject to pressure from the outside world, and that requires an adaptation of the regulations to the new changes in the outside world and new frameworks. This means that how we actually handle the work with burden reduction, impact assessment, systematic evaluations of regulations, with strong international institutional setup together with a political will, that affects regulation and business environment in a more or less competitive way, and release or increase costs for investments. The upside of this, however, is that we really can influence the regulatory framework, and that better regulation measures often are relatively cheap compared to the losses we will have if we do not perform them. I will try to give you some short input values from NNR side about what we think is important for better regulation work in the EU and where Sweden as a member state stands today and could do more. I will first start with the stock of regulations and together with their targets and actions for simplifying. The interinstitutional agreement, a hard word but a very good word, lays the foundation and joint responsibility for the EU institutions in delivering high-quality union legislations. When we look upon the process and the tools to handle and reduce the stock of legislation in the EU, I'm so far very positive to the strong commitment from the Commission. The creation of institutions such as refit platform, regulatory scrutiny board, etc. is very positive. And I think refit platform is a very good example. NNR, the organization I'm representing, has on behalf of its members provided with almost 50 proposals for improvements within different areas. And we also think that the refit platform actually shows business and their representatives that there is a way to pass on proposals for improvements and simplification of EU legislation. The Danish Business Forum has served as an inspiration, and of course we hope that the Swedish government also will be inspired by this important work to achieve regulations fit for purpose. To be able to measure and effectively steer the better regulation work in the right direction, the work of the EU and the Commission needs to be complemented by one or more net targets on a reduction of the regulatory burden. With a target, there is a clear goal to steer towards and to follow up that the regulatory burden actually decreases, or at least not increases. In the interinstitutional agreement, the Commission has already declared that it will investigate the possibility to, within the refit program, to set a target for reduction of the burden within specific sectors. And NNR supports this and is happy also that Sweden does, and the Council as well, in their conclusions. On the other hand, I would say that the Commission's work on the EU level cannot succeed alone. Work also has to be performed in the Member States and by the Member States, both when it comes to political will and targets as well, but also that there are relevant mandates and missions are given to regulators, and that you have a real process for this. Otherwise, we will see no reduction in burden, or even worse, an increase in burden. The follow-up made by the Swedish Agency for Economic and Regional Growth shows that the regulatory costs to business in Sweden has increased since 2013. The administrative costs caused by new regulations has increased by 1.2 billion Swedish crowns each year. And since 2016, the agency also analyzes not only administrative costs, but also other regulatory costs. And that is really good. The collective picture for 2016 is an increase in total regulatory costs on approximately 5.6 billion Swedish crowns, and that is 580 million euros. This follow-up made by the agency also says that there is unfortunately no indication of a decline of costs towards 2020, which means that the target set by the Swedish government of lower regulatory costs to business by 2020 compared to 2012 will not be met. Our own surveys from LNR also shows that the companies in Sweden over time experience a rise of regulatory burden and to follow national regulations. We think that the overall explanation for this is that Sweden's target for burden reduction is too vague and that there is today no formal or informal process of requirements to reduce the regulatory burden. Other member states, such as the Netherlands, UK, and also Norway, have today a net burden reduction. And I would say that we, from NNR side, and our members, will of course every time be at the government's disposal and will do what we can to help to advise how to change this negative trend. I think also that if the better regulation work within the member states and the EU do not go hand in hand, one of them will, in the worst case, neutralize the achievements of the others when it comes to competition and burden reduction. But better regulation is not only about the stock. The flow of the new regulation is as important as well. Great achievements have been made, but more needs to be done to restore and strengthen the European business's competitiveness. We think, therefore, that the Commission's work with this better regulation package is very positive, and it has introduced a system covering the whole legislative process. At the same time, impact assessment of substantial amendments to the Commission's regulatory proposals are lacking, especially on Council amendments. We think that EU could do more here with greater commitment from the European Parliament and from the Council. And for this to happen, we need more push from the Member States via the Council, but also an effective control mechanism is needed regarding on how each of the institutions have implemented the better regulation area. Member States can do more to facilitate and fulfill the intentions of the better regulation work themselves. To assess if there are any specific impacts of an EU proposal to business in Sweden, a national impact assessment needs to be done. The Swedish Better Regulation Council today has the task to assess the EU impact assessments and give advice on what a Swedish impact assessment should focus on. These tasks, I think, could be developed and be used more frequently. We also have had a committee of inquiry in Sweden that identified a democratic deficit in the Swedish process regarding the possibilities for individuals and stakeholders to access and participate and influence matters decided within the EU. As a result, the inquiry came up with important proposals to deal with this, and maybe, I do not know if our minister will say something about how this will be handled, but we do, however, fully support the inquiry's recommendation. Another thing is more uniform implementation and application of EU directives and EU regulations. It needs to be transparent if the Member States intends to exceed the minimum level, the reasons for this, and especially what impacts any over-implementation may cause to businesses. NNR has, together with the Swedish Better Regulation Council and also other Member States' business organizations within the Business Europe, developed 6 articles that should be a starting point for the assessment. We also had a Swedish National Board of Trade that has come up with an interesting proposal, suggesting that Member States that intend to adopt more stringent regulations than the minimum harmonization rules shall need to notify the EU of their intention. In connection to that, communicate the legal acts that have been adopted for implementation of a specific EU directive. This is, as we think, a good way forward to both follow and measure implementation. Last but not least, I want to raise the issue of impact assessment and quality checks of impact assessments. Review of impact assessments by an independent body is important. There are several features that are important for a regulatory scrutiny board to become successful. For example, independency, transparency, a strong mandate, and an organizational setup, etc. And of course, political engagement and pressure in the system. NNR made a short review of some important features of the regulatory scrutiny boards and scrutiny bodies and the within the RegWatch Europe, and also including the regulatory scrutiny board. And I would say it's very clear that high political commitment is crucial to achieve impact assessment of high quality. In the UK and in the Commission services, political commitment has put pressure on resubmissions and complementation of impact assessments that have been deemed deficient by the scrutiny board. If the opinion by any reason will not be followed, an explanation needs to be given. In the German and the Dutch system, key factor seems to be an iterative process finalized by an opinion, with the impact assessment being improved as much as possible by contacts with the ministers. Other requirements that we have found so far and also exists reinforce the opinion of the scrutiny board. In Germany, for example, proposals are only tabled in the cabinet if an opinion is available. Opinions are therefore attached to the proposal. We also know that in the new Finnish system, there is a requirement that a bill needs to include a description on whether the Finnish Council has issued an opinion, and if so, how the opinion of the Council has been taken into account. In Sweden and Norway, however, there are no such impetus today. Swedish impact assessments that have been deemed deficient by the Swedish Better Regulation Council may thus pass in the system, leading to decisions which could not be based on evidence and all impacts that a proposal might have for our decision makers. So we think that with a commitment in the system to complement and resubmit impact assessments that have been deemed deficient by the regulatory scrutiny body, regulatory decisions made by the politicals can be better informed, giving them a base to choose the most cost-efficient way, etc., etc., and fulfill the aim, of course. I would just mention that a requirement on efficiency, where it must be proved that the benefits exceeds the costs, is the US example that we learned earlier this year when Mr. Kassanstein, former head of the White House OIRA, described for us when he visited NNR. That is a positive example. So I would say that the issue of political commitment and quality of RIAs is an area where I think where Sweden can improve. Our Minister Mikael Damberg last year said that he would not accept another year with bad statistics regarding impact assessments. And my hope is that we together can change this trend with a stronger political commitment, a clear mandate, and of course with contributions from the business side. With this introductory word, I will happily leave the floor to our distinguished guests, who will take us further towards a more competitive Europe. And to their and my help in doing so, please also welcome to the floor Pernilla Ström, who is our moderator and timekeeper. The floor is yours, and I want to say again, most welcome and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andrea, and so welcome to you as well. We are going for the next hour and 45 minutes. We're going to discuss the ways we can have a better regulation for a more competitive Europe. And the program will be as such. We will listen to a couple of introductions, and then we will have 2 examples from real business life, making it more practical and not so theoretical. And then I will open the floor for the last 25 minutes or so, 20-25 minutes or so, for a panel discussion up here, where you in the audience will be invited to ask questions. But since we are very, very tight as regards to time, please make the question very short and very brilliant. And by that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to introduce our most distinguished guest. His name is Frans Timmermans. He's the first Vice President of the European Commission, and he's going to speak about the EU Better Regulation Agenda, state of play, experiences and future challenges. How can Sweden and other member states reinforce the work on better regulation? Ladies and gentlemen, give Frans Timmermans a big hand.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to be here. It's an important topic we discuss, because I believe better regulation can be a driver for a competitive Europe. We need this. We need an occasion where we can look at the state of play, share experiences, and debate current and future challenges. And I especially welcome it that we can have this discussion in Sweden, a country which has been so much in the forefront when it comes to better regulation. And I'm always happy to see the strong support my work gets from the Swedish government. This Commission has come into office at a very particular time in the history of European integration, a time of crises and disillusionment in the tangible benefits of the European project. People are not convinced that Europe is good for them. And only by delivering results we can win back our citizens' trust in this unique project. Results and reconnecting with our fundamental values is, I think, the dual approach we need to take. This is why this Commission, the Juncker Commission, started from the very beginning to do things differently. This is why a few weeks ago we put on the table our white paper on the future of Europe, and only yesterday our reflection paper on globalization. This is of course also why we put better regulation at the heart of our daily work from the very beginning. And this is why we have delivered on our promise to be big on big things and small on small things. But a new crisis, a more fundamental crisis has come along, a crisis that cuts much closer to the raison d'être of better regulation. The crisis of evidence, the crisis of facts. We live in a world where some do not believe in the role played by CO2 in global warming, and they say so publicly. We live in a world where politicians, sometimes also media, and sometimes bureaucrats, they don't only lie. Lying is in human nature, it's been done forever. But they no longer even care when they're caught. This is new. And this is, I think, dangerous for a society based on openness and on democracy. So, if opinion and facts are put on the same level, if you can say that the earth is flat is an opinion that is just as important as the opinion that the earth is round, then how can you base things on facts when you do an analysis of impact assessment and better regulation? What role are we going to give to scientific findings in a world where leading politicians say that they have had enough of experts? And in a world where democracy is reduced to the mere imposition of the will of a majority, of a specific majority at a specific time. And if that majority is the sole authority in all fields, including in the judiciary and including in business, democracy is more about respect for minorities than about the imposition of the will of the majority. And this is something that is essential to the way our society functions. I wanted to raise these fundamental issues because they are all of relevance for the better regulation system. It is much more fundamental than just cutting red tape for businesses. This is about the way we organize our society. We regulate, we accept regulation, we accept the rule of law, we respect everybody's role in that. So this is a fundamental issue. In any case, the answer can never be that we ditch evidence-based policy making and we ditch scrutiny, we leave analysis aside, and we just do what the majority wants, or at least what we think the majority wants if we are in power. I think we need to do better in how we construct our regulation system and how, at the European level, at the national level, subnational level, we are also accountable to that. But we also need to understand that we cannot simply answer a demand for a politics of emotions with a strengthened politics of facts. I think one of the reasons why facts have flown out of the window and emotions are so dominant is that we fail to understand that emotions are extremely important in politics. So if our opponents, especially those who challenge the European Union and those who are so committed to destroy the European Union, they are very emotional about this, and they are very, I would almost say, idealistic about this. And we counter their arguments with PowerPoint presentations and statistics, not very convincing at the end of the day. So we need to make sure that what we are doing is also based on our values, not just on scientific evidence. So, we need scientific evidence. Scientific evidence should be guiding principles, but scientific evidence will not be convincing if they are not recognizable elements of a much broader value-based system. And I think on this basis we need to work together, EU institutions and member states, but also businesses. The organization of our society is not just the sole responsibility of politics or government. It is also the responsibility of all actors, citizens, businesses, NGOs. And I think we see now in this fourth industrial revolution that is changing fundamentally the way we produce, we consume, we live together, that businesses more than ever before feel this responsibility and want to take this responsibility. But at the same time, some businesses, mostly non-European businesses, have become so big that they think they are the masters of their own regulation, the masters of their own tax rules, and the masters of their own position in society, which is also something I think that undermines the social contract in our societies, and is something that we as Europeans should not tolerate. Anyway, in this context, one of my aims has been to improve the cooperation and coordination of our regulatory environment across the Union by promoting the use of better regulation as a founding regulatory principle, by sharing good practice and by helping each other identifying and removing bad practice. Over the past 2.5 years, we have embedded better regulation into the DNA of the Commission, installing a priority-driven, evidence-based, transparent, and above all, inclusive policy process. The aim is to make sure we deliver high-quality policy proposals that remove obstacles to growth and foster innovation, proposals that minimize regulatory costs while promoting social and environmental sustainability. These are our values. This is why this Commission now focuses on those things that need to be done at the level of the Union and making sure that they are done well. So stop doing what is nice to do, only do what we need to do. Ambitious when it needs to be, and humble when it can. This is complemented by the extensive set of measures we took in our Better Regulation package of May 2015, and which have now been under implementation for some time. I do not think I need to spend time describing in detail this package and its implementation, but I want to stress a few points. The new independent oversight body, the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, supports downstream and upstream further improvements in the Commission's evaluations and impact assessments. Our methodological guidance is better, but we need to keep working on it. Learning from experiences, simplifying, better assessing impacts like those on innovation. This is why we will soon come forward with an upgraded toolbox for better regulation. We are building upon our interinstitutional agreement on better lawmaking, working with the European Parliament and Council to ensure that everyone is fulfilling their commitments. We're not there yet. There is progress in the way we interact. More than 100 open consultations are the norm for all major initiatives and evaluations, and by now we have done more than 100. Public feedback on draft implementing and delegated acts are influencing important decisions, such as those on endocrine disruptors and roaming rates, decisions which once would have readily been labeled as technocratic, undemocratic, non-transparent. Now we're making them more transparent, we're making them more democratic. But stakeholders still are not able to make the most of the new consultation opportunities we offer to them. They frequently complain about bias in our questions and the limited feedback they receive. We need to improve on that further, and I am strongly committed to do that. More than 150 refit initiatives are included in the Commission's work programme so far. More than 100 proposals have been identified for withdrawal and several more for repeal. The members of the refit platform work hard on simplification proposals, and when I say work hard, I really mean it. They really work very hard. It's for Commission even hard to keep up with them sometimes, I have to say. So they work hard on simplification proposals to come to an agreed view across different interests. Their first 22 opinions are being followed up in our 2017 work programme, including an opinion based on suggestion from the Swedish Better Regulation Council regarding VAT exemption for the intra-community supplies of goods. The follow-up is expected in the second half of 2017 in the form of a proposal for a definitive VAT system. So that comes straight from this organisation, straight onto the table of our proposals. Additional refit platform opinions based on suggestions from the Swedish Better Regulation Council in the areas of taxation and agriculture were adopted in April this year. All this will feed into the preparation of next year's work programme that we are working on now. I also look forward to the platform opinions under preparation, some of which, again, will also be based on suggestions from the Swedish Better Regulation Council, namely in the area of agriculture. One big field of regulation where we can certainly use some improvement. But I'm certainly not complacent. We still have a lot to do. On targets, we will assess the feasibility of setting objectives to reduce the burdens from EU law in key economic sectors, as we committed to do in our interinstitutional agreement. But burden reduction cannot be a Commission-only endeavour. A joint effort between the European Parliament, the Council, the Member States and the Commission is needed if real benefits are to be delivered to the businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises and public authorities. We will present our first annual burden survey, our feasibility assessment and an improved refit scoreboard after the summer. We're working on that now. We will help Member States to better identify gold plating and look closer at implementation and enforcement to disentangle where burdens come from. And then let me be very clear about this. Sometimes I'm being accused, you are taking away our powers to gold plate. Absolutely not. If you want, in the transposition of EU law, if you want to add other legislation, other rules to that, you have the right to do that. That is EU law. But I want you to be transparent about it. But can I say that I'm sick and tired of being blamed for regulation that has been added at the national level and then Europe gets the blame for that? If you want to add national legislation, be my guest, but be honest about it and transparent about it. So when people complain about it, they know to whom they need to complain, not to us. And we will help Member States to do better. Identify it, because also in my experience, sometimes Member States don't even know that it's happening because officials are doing it in the ministries. They didn't get it through national legislation, so they think, hey, we now have an interesting European directive, we could perhaps quietly add on some stuff there. And the responsible ministers then sometimes don't even see it. You know, I'm not talking about Sweden necessarily, but I see some people nodding in the audience, so apparently it is not a phenomenon that is unknown in Sweden either. But let me say something about Sweden in conclusion. You might not know this when you live in Sweden, but Sweden has always been a frontrunner on our legislative agenda, and it is an inspiration to all of us, especially in terms of open governance. You are the champions of transparency, and I cannot stress enough how important that this is in this day and age, when people no longer accept a trust me government and have a show me attitude towards governance at all levels. Sweden should continue to be an active partner on our regulatory agenda and to inspire us all with constructive inputs and sparring. My plea to Sweden is simple. Continue to work with your stakeholders and your partners, both domestically and throughout Europe, to identify the main problems as well as help us find the best solutions. Work with us to implement these solutions. I think this seminar is a good occasion to do just that, and I highly appreciate that. That's why I'm here today. But I cannot tell you which system or processes will work best for you. The differences between member states are too big for that. There is no one-size-fits-all. I can only say that we need your Swedish pragmatism and innovativeness, both in Sweden, but in the wider Europe. Also in regulatory policy, we need innovation in how we make regulation. We need the examples of Sweden, and may I add Denmark, and Germany, and the Netherlands, if I can add the country I know best, as well to the list. But we see a revolution in other member states as well, sometimes even in countries you would not expect this to happen. Many things are going on in Spain. Italy has woken up to this issue. Across Central and Eastern Europe, we now get requests to work more closely on this. So the better regulation agenda is gaining more and more momentum. And I think also across businesses. You know, when I started with this, many businesses were skeptical or even cynical, saying, yeah, we've heard this all before. Yeah, we've heard. Van Miert started with this and so many others. Yeah. But I think we've now reached a point where people understand that we're actually changing. We're actually changing. Things are really changing. And that is because society is ready to accept also the change, and member states are ready to engage in that change. And businesses no longer just complain about governments, but they also come with solutions to help governments do better. And I think that all stakeholders sharing this goal will help us be better at delivering the results our citizens want and our businesses want, be better at cutting red tape where we can, and be better at making regulation fit for purpose in the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Frans Timmermans. Actually, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. Because
to me?
Yes.
Okay. I shall not disappear up from that.
I'm a moderator, that's kind of things moderators do.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Because I thought it was very interesting, but because what you were doing, actually, you were making a speech very philosophical. The question about better regulation, you actually make it as a tool, as a question about survival of the European Union. Because you were talking about, we know that the European Union right now are under very heavy challenge. We had this presidential election last Sunday. And we know that the forces that are challenging the European Union are very against the European Union because they often are complaining about bureaucracy and regulations and so on. And you also said here that stop blaming us when you are gold-plating. Do you feel that national politicians have been too covered? Too much covered?
No.
Not going out defending actually what they're doing and what you do in the European Union, but saying that we need to do this because they decide so in Brussels.
Well, you know, for perhaps 15 years now, perhaps even longer, it's become the national politicians' sport to claim successes as their successes and to blame Brussels whenever something doesn't work. And that was a risk-free enterprise because there was no European demos, so they couldn't get caught. You know, it's a process that goes on in politics also at the national level. You will know it in Sweden. The mayor of a town somewhere in Sweden will blame Stockholm or the central government because there will be media who will say, wait a minute, is that true? Is that? And they will ask the central government, etc. That doesn't happen in Europe. It didn't happen in Europe. It's happening now. Things are really changing. So it was risk-free. But there was also a side effect that I think was not intended. But Brexit showed how serious it was. If you blame Europe for everything that's gone wrong and that's going wrong in your society, and then you do that over 2 decades, and at the end of the day, you say, people, you've been attacking Brussels for 20 years, and then you say, oh, Europe for 20 years, and then you say, but please vote for Europe. What do you think the people are going to say? You know, if you don't take responsibility for your own decisions, and if you don't defend the European project will be weakened, if not fail. So, but over the last years, the idea was we can attack Brussels, it's risk-free, and Brussels will survive anyway. So I think what we have seen through political dynamics in a number of member states, and especially through Brexit, is that people come to realize, wait a minute, this is not unbreakable, this can be broken. Do we want this to be broken? No, we want it to be improved. We're not happy with everything, but we don't want it to be broken. So that might lead to a reconsideration of this dynamic of always blaming Brussels for everything that doesn't go well. And I see this happening. I see this happening. You saw it in Rome when the 27 member states came together and pledged their allegiance, in fact, to the European project. You see it also happening in societies where young people are now waking up and speaking out for Europe and its values. So I'm more optimistic than I was 2 years ago. And better regulation is part of it. Yeah. Because it was always the same issue. You know, politicians were behaving like the emperor in Milos Forman's Amadeus. You know, when Amadeus has performed his first opera for the emperor, And then the emperor comes and sees him, and Amadeus says, "Do you like it? Do you like it?" And the emperor says, "Yes, but too many notes." And that's sometimes also the reaction of national politicians in society to Europe. But yes, we like it, but too much regulation. And let's be specific. If there is too much regulation, we'll deal with it. But you can't do in a complex society like ours, you can't do without regulation. And this is also an issue we need to discuss. Better regulation, that's what we need to do.
Not only deregulation, better regulations.
Better regulation. Sometimes it's deregulation, but if
sometimes new regulation.
Yes, exactly.
Because what you were saying was that you were saying that we need to stop doing what's nice. We need to start doing what's needed.
Yes.
So what do you see that we're doing we're not doing that's needed instead of doing what's nice?
Well, if you look for it very concretely, the European Commission in its Commission Work Programme before this Commission always had on average, I think, 130 proposals every year. And the only reaction you got from the European Parliament was more. We all want to be rapporteur, we all want to do this, we want to... So we changed that. And the first reaction we got from the European Parliament is, no, we can't survive with less. And then so the amount of regulation was a goal per se to keep the system going. So we needed to change the system. And now this Commission has never proposed more than 23 proposals every year. And initially this led to a huge confrontation, especially between me and the European Parliament. Now we found a way in which the European Parliament can change the way it looks at regulation. So you're not only relevant if you draft new legislation, you can also be relevant in checking existing legislation and taking out what is no longer necessary. You can also be relevant in scrutinizing existing policies and checking whether they're still fit for purpose. So it is truly a cultural change in the way we do business in Europe, and I'm excited about this, but the point of no return has not been achieved yet. We need to sustain this. I think the point of no return will be achieved by the end of the mandate of this Commission, if we continue in this effort.
When less is more.
Then I think people will understand that less is more, but people will also understand that in some areas we need regulation. We need regulation to create solidarity in the asylum policy. We need regulation to face the threat of terrorism. We need regulation to make our economy more sustainable, to make sure that we don't waste too much, to make sure that we transform into sustainable energy resources, etc.
And do you have an even level for competition?
Yes, yes. This goes back to social Europe. I want to make this pitch also here in Sweden today. If we talk about social Europe, we're not talking about all sorts of EU regulation. Most of it, the overwhelming majority, is the competence of member states. And there is a lot of diversity in the European Union. But I also believe European citizens don't want countries in Europe to compete on social security levels. The economy of the future is not a low labor cost economy. That's not the future. So people believe that Europe has done a lot for banks, but not that much for European citizens. And talking about what the future of social Europe is also a way of communicating to our citizens, your worries are our worries, and we need to do something about this. Which isn't saying that Europe should regulate on that, but which is saying all Europeans should come together, exchange experiences, and make sure that we help each other and not compete against each other on the basis of social protection.
And that's where we bring in the values.
That's all about values. That is what people think is very valuable in their lives.
Thank you so much, Frans Timmermans.
My pleasure.
You will be back in the panel.
Okay, thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now we go hastily over to our Swedish Minister of Enterprise and Innovation. His name is Mikael Damberg, and you are all very acquainted with him. And he's going to speak about how can Sweden reinforce the work and aim of the Commission on better regulation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to first thank the Board of Swedish Industry and Commerce for better regulation for hosting this seminar. I think it's a great opportunity for us not only to discuss, but also to learn from each other and to develop even better regulation for the future. I would also like to start off by thanking Commissioner Timmermans for a very interesting presentation, especially perhaps your important message on the role of Europe and how Europe and European Union has to change to meet up with the demands of our citizens, but also for the future. I think this, how to interact with the citizens, but also with companies in Europe, is one part of being relevant and being really as good as we hope the European Union should be. It's also about regulation, supporting and driving change, as you were talking about, but also see possibilities in modern and up-to-date regulation when it comes to the digital revolution. What this means for our societies, but also what it means for regulation. I think these are important questions for us to discuss and also to stay head on. And I would like to thank Frans Timmermans also for his personal commitment on these issues, because you have been kind of a game changer in Brussels when it comes to these issues. And I want to thank you for your kind words on Sweden, both for our board's work, but also for the government's support. And I can assure you that the Swedish government will continue to be a strong supporter for the Commission's work on better regulation for the future. So thank you very much. In my capacity as Minister for Enterprise and Innovation, I put a lot of efforts, of course, on creating a climate where businesses can grow and thrive. Here in Sweden, we have quite a few strong global big players among companies, and we have a good deal of small companies. But we don't have enough growing companies, not enough mid-sized companies. As you all know, large companies are still important for employment, exports, and innovation. But when we look at statistics, it's very clear that the new jobs are created, especially in small and medium-sized companies. And therefore, my ambition to lower the hurdles that are keeping companies from growing, being the lack of finance, support their internationalization, or to push to make the first employment in their companies. Ease of doing business is, of course, part of this. It molds better services, but also fit-for-purpose regulation. I will come back to the Swedish perspective in a moment, but as a large part of the legislation affecting Swedish companies is decided at the EU level, it is essential to focus our common attention to the work being done on the European level. Ultimately, this is a question of more jobs and economic growth for the future. First of all, just as in Sweden, the majority of all companies in the European Union are small. The same rules affect small and large companies differently, and the differences can be big. Therefore, regulation should be designed for small businesses, having in mind that what is simple for a small company is often simple also for big companies. Simplification in the EU is a long-term project that requires continuous focus to yield results. For some time, Sweden has been working along the lines of 3 goals for better regulation in the European Union. First, to think small first principle. Second, better impact assessments. 3, the quantifiable goals in improving regulations. Therefore, I very much welcome the Commission's commitment to better regulation and the steps recently taken. Sweden supports the European Commission's ambitious work on better regulation and the regulatory fitness and performance program, and welcomes that the regulatory scrutiny board is now up and running. The REFIT platform provides us with a forum for interaction between national governments and stakeholders, and will in June present its opinions for the 2018 Commission's work program. The Commission's work with impact assessments has been impressive and gives a good basis for decisions in the legislative process. We're happy that the Council recently decided to start its own impact assessments when there are substantial amendments to a proposal in the Council. I think this is very important. And of course, Sweden welcomes the consideration of the digital dimension in the preparation of new proposals. In the development process of new rules and legislation, it is of most importance that the digital by default is used, as both old and new businesses is very much digital. So, the Swedish perspective then, back to Sweden. As said, businesses in Sweden are to the high extent affected by decisions made on the European level, but of course there is a lot to be done at the national level. Sweden works on regulation guided by two goals: better service and more fit-to-purpose rules. When it comes to fit-for-purpose rules, impact assessments plays an important role. The Swedish Better Regulation Council reviews and comments on the quality of impact assessments to proposals that may have effects on importance of companies. This is crucial to shine light on the quality of the impact assessments, as well as on the regulatory burdens affecting businesses as a result of regulation. We work hard to improve the quality of the impact assessments. For 2016, we see that the quality of impact assessments have been improved, although I see room for a lot of improvement. In order to be able to follow how Swedish businesses' administrative costs develop over time, this is something that we monitor each year. This year, report shows, as was mentioned before, an upswing in costs, to a high degree due to implementation of EU regulation. This points to the challenge to connect to the very much needed harmonization between member states. When it comes to better services, I think that there is a lot to be done that will have very positive influence on the everyday life of entrepreneurs. There is a lot of time and money to be saved if the interaction with authorities being handling of permits, data or declaration would be made smoother. If it was made easier not to do wrong. To me, the answer here is spelled digitalization. Finding ways to combining better regulation and digitalization mean finding completely new levels of ease of doing business. In Sweden, this means we have to step up our game when it comes to overall digitalization of the public administration. As an example, up until recently, it wasn't possible for a Swedish company to hand in their annual report in a digital format. 2016. A napkin was okay, but a digital file was not. Of course, I'm happy to say that this has managed to change, and I see that this will only continue further going forward. There are two other examples I would like to mention here shortly, what we're doing when it comes to better regulation and digitalization. First of all, the case of restaurants. Restaurants are the first category of companies that soon will be able to start and run completely digital with only one service, one interface. On the government business portal, verksam.se, restaurants and cafe entrepreneurs will have easy access to the whole process of starting and running a business step by step, only having to fill in data once. Behind the interface, there will be a lot of machine-to-machine communication, doing a lot of the work that today is done by the entrepreneurs. What is unique in this and complex about the project is that it includes permits for businesses at a local level. So the project is not complete until 290 municipalities in Sweden are on board. There is a reason that restaurants are our pilot project in this, because this business is surrounded by a lot of regulation, for obvious reasons, health and safety. I think this is really important. If we can learn from this project how to really simplify the work for restaurants and cafes, and how they can interact and also get permits, but also do their business, this is an example how different sectors of society could be done afterwards. So I'm looking forward to this project to see the results this year. The second thing I would say on the future of regulation is about fintech. Sweden is a starting place for many startup companies in the digital world. We're very proud of it. But the digitalization process also reshapes the way we do businesses in almost every field. Sweden would like to be a world leader when it comes to producing these kind of startups also in the future. Regulation developed for all businesses is not always rigged for these new business models. So one sector that we're really strong in is fintech, startups in the business of financial services. It's obvious a good reason for this sector to be surrounded by a lot of regulation. But we have understood that it's very hard for startups to understand what permits are necessary and how the regulation works. It's difficult for the startup to fulfill their obligations. It's hard also for the authorities to take on the role of advisors, as they also are the supervisory authority at the same time. To reduce these challenges, we have given the Financial Supervisory Authority and Vinnova, the Innovation Authority, together a joint mission to investigate how the Financial Supervisory Authority can meet the issues and needs of new fintech startups. It is like a regulatory sandbox, but with a greater scope, not just looking at one case. It is about flexibility and enabling innovation in a sector that is really regulated today. So I will finish by saying this is how I believe that we have to look at the development of better regulation, with a digital mindset on a national level, but also on a European level. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mikael Damberg. Wait.
Oh.
Don't run away.
Sorry.
You're not going to slip away.
No.
I think there were two great examples you were showing, talking about what you're doing in the fintech and also talking about what you're doing in the restaurants. And Avaxam.se is a fantastic invention, I must say. Still, we do have a problem, as actually the authority of national and regional growth has shown, that we do have a growing burden of regulations. We've got administrative costs of roughly 1.2 billion a year. We got a total cost around 4.7 billion in 2016. So even if we do have the best of intentions, and even if you and the government say we're going to deregulate and we're going to take down that administrative cost, we can see this dragon is still growing. What can be done?
I think it's not one thing that can be changed. It's a kind of mindset, but it's also focusing on the right issues, as the Commissioner was telling. When we look at 2016, the biggest kind of change was implementing a EU regulation that is important for trade between European countries. And if you count the numbers, it looks like a very huge cost for Swedish companies. When we talk about Tullverket, they will say that 99% of Swedish kind of exports are already implementing these kind of ways of doing business. So we also have to look into the details. What are new costs and what are costs that has already been taken on by some companies? So you have to have both these kind of images on the same time. But I think we have to do more, but I think that, again, what would really reduce the cost will be digitalization. Because digitalization will make it so much easier. It is a cost at the beginning, but introducing more digital services will reduce costs for companies in the long run. So I think this is the way to really revolutionize both the contact with authorities, but also the time spent, but also the way of not being afraid of doing wrong, having implemented a system that you know can follow step by step and do the right thing, then the cost will be reduced. So I think digitalization is the cost-saving driver for the next 20 years to come.
And that's a very efficient tool, hopefully. But still we do have the other thing and the other problem. And the problem is that, for example, we do have this kind of over-implementation, or what we call gold plating. And sometimes gold plating is actually what we want, because we want to have higher standards. But sometimes, actually, the politicians are not very honest about that. We could hear Mr. Frans Timmermans was quite critical about how some local national actors are talking. So what do you comment to that?
No, I think it's a good point to say that if we want to have better regulation in Sweden than the rest of Europe, we should be honest about it. It's not I think that's a good kind of perspective to have. And I think to be honest, Sweden has a higher standard on environmental issues than many other European countries. We want to have higher standards on this area. And we see that this is part of a good society. And we also see that many Swedish companies actually compete on global markets by being in the forefront of sustainable development. So sometimes it goes hand in hand, but we should be honest, if we do more than the European Union says we have to do, we should be honest about it. But I think it is a fair point to say sometimes in the Swedish system, some of the minor changes is actually handled by our authorities, so perhaps it's not always clear what was in the process. So I think that is a fair point also for Sweden.
Yeah, you were also mentioning the problem that some authorities that are going to implement a new directive, for example, they are supervising the companies that are going to implement this new directive, and they don't want to give advice. And that means that the companies are out there in the dark, fumbling around. What can be done there?
I think it's interesting to follow the development of skattemyndigheten in Sweden, also the tax authority in Sweden. 10 or 15 years ago, everyone hated the authority because you couldn't understand what to do, you didn't get any answers. Today, this is one of the authorities that is highly valued in the Swedish society. You get top points, top scores, even by companies saying that we get help from them in advance, knowing how to handle the questions. I think that mindset should inspire more authorities to actually to move in a different direction, where you help people not to do mistakes and make them feel comfortable about what kind of decisions they have to make. Because I think authorities should play that role in the society.
So what you're saying is that 10 years from now, the FSA will be as loved, FSA is the Finansinspektionen, will be as loved as the Skatteverket among bankers?
I hope actually that this project will lead to that, because we now given them the task to talk with the startups, to actually understand the startups, to see what kind of regulation they don't understand, or what is not the purpose of this regulation. So I hope that this Vinnova joint venture would lead to a different kind of scope. Otherwise, we'll have to interfere, because I think this is also part of the Swedish experience that Skattemyndigheten has done, and we would like more to follow.
Okay, thank you so much, Mikael Damberg.